Hi, and welcome to Untethered with Jen Liss, the podcast that's here to help you break free, be you, and unleash your inner brilliance. I'm your host, Jen, and in this episode, we're going to talk about why the only right way is your way and how to create your life from a place of joy. Let's dive in. Hey there, unicorn. It's Jen. Welcome back to the podcast for this fabulous episode with Kristin Lee Geiger. Our guest today is a certified yoga and fitness instructor, mindfulness teacher, and course creator who's just a little bit obsessed with helping you find the exact right balance of things that makes your best, most rewarding workout routine possible. And not only that, she's really all about helping you find the joy in life and crafting a life, and not just a workout program, but really a life that works for you. She shares her story, which is a very relatable story for many of us. This is such a good episode for anybody who's ever been burnt out in your job. Maybe you're burnt out now. Maybe you followed a path that felt like, this is the path, this is it, this is it. And then all of a sudden, maybe it doesn't feel right anymore. If you've ever had that experience or you're having that experience right now, this is a great conversation for you. So many good things that Kristin shares along her journey that I know you're going to get a lot from. So without further ado, welcoming to the podcast, Kristin Lee Geiger. Hi, Kristin.
Hi. Hi, Jen. How are you?
So good. I'm so glad to have you on the podcast and to come and share your journey. So you have an amazing business. It's beautiful, by the way. Everybody go follow her on Instagram. The link is in the show notes. It's so beautiful. I appreciate a gorgeous aesthetic to people's videos and visuals. That's not me. I don't put together like the most perfect, beautiful videos, but with what you do, it's so important and it's so beautiful. So I just have to say that.
Oh, thank you. I mean, at least it's like one way I can put my degree to work, right? It's like there's still some design in there somewhere.
Which is so perfect because you know, the skills that we have been developing over time, we forget this sometimes, that those skills, like it was there for a reason because it's serving you today.
Yeah.
Which really takes us to your journey.
Yeah, I guess there it is.
Because
There's
you weren't a yoga instructor. This is the perfect intro. Yeah. You're a yoga instructor. Now you have your own business that puts together meditation and yoga, and we'll get to talking about exactly what that is. But how did you get to this point? Was this something you've always been into yoga when you were a kid? You were really into movement and that kind of thing?
Yes and no. Yoga itself, never. Like that was never part of the plan. I was in sports as a kid, so I like to move, you know. I love gymnastics and swimming and that kind of stuff. So that was like more my vein. But I didn't even know what yoga was till I was like at least 16, probably. And I went to a class I will never forget. I went to my very first class. Like it was a city program. It was at the city hall. And I just remember walking in. And the instructor was like, okay, take off your shoes. And I was like, who takes off their shoes to work out? You know, and then she was like, socks too. And I was like, well, why would I want to like put my bare feet on this gross mat? And like, I just had like the worst experience. We were just like holding poses and like not moving. And I was like, I'm sorry, you're supposed to move when you work out. Like, what is happening here? You know, so my first experience with yoga was not great.
Feet on the floor. I just have to say that was the first time that I went to a yoga class too. I was just looking around at everybody's feet and I'm like, oh, we're all just, it's so funny. The American culture, like we don't go barefoot very often.
Right. It's just like really so weird. Off-putting if you're not used to that. And you're just like, what is going on here? And so anyway, so like fast forward a couple of years and I had kind of gotten into yoga in college because I had also gotten into distance running. So like I was really pounding the pavement there, training for marathons. And then I did this yoga thing, as I called it on occasion, to stretch, you know, so that was like my cross training. But anyway, what I studied in college, of course, was fashion design. And that was like, I was be all end all, like ride or die, you know, doing that. I think I made that decision when I was like 10. And from then on, it was just like, this is what we're going to do, you know? And I had an edge. Like I knew how to sew, like I knew how to sketch. I started taking classes for college credit before I even graduated high school. So like I had a full semesters of credits like going in. So like I was pretty serious about it, you know? And I was like pretty motivated and determined. So like I was just all in all the time. There was no other option, you know, it was just that. And to be honest, I never questioned it. I never even thought that there would be another way to live my life. That was just it. Until I think it was the last summer, right before I graduated. I had one last semester to go back and finish. And I had kind of caught in the travel bug studying abroad. And so there was this study tour to go to India. And it was not related to my major at all. But I found a way to like sneak it in. And I was like, yeah, sure, this relates. It's fine, so it counts. And so I went and we spent a lot of time in India, like going around to different farmers in very rural, remote areas. And it was actually cool because for me, like as a fashion major, it was like, okay, well, now we get to see like organic cotton production and we get to see like sericulture or silk production. So there was like raw, good material, use to it for sure. So it applied there. And I like supply chain stuff. I think that's interesting. So like I was all about that. But anyway, I'll never forget. I went to, as part of our group, we ended up at this farm in the middle of nowhere. And it was a multi-generational farm. So there was probably 15 people, I suppose, like living in this like relatively small house. And by our Western standards, this family, this farming community was like very poor, right? But nonetheless, they're welcoming us into their home, excuse me. They're so excited to have visitors from halfway across the world. They're offering us their rice, their tea, all their whatever. Like their hospitality is through the roof. And they had this look on their face of like completely unbridled joy that I will never forget. Like I've never seen someone smile like that before, or it's just like beaming out of them. And you're wondering like, how are you so happy when like by our standards, like you don't have anything that would make you successful, right? And it was just so wild to me. But I remember that. And then as soon as I finished that trip, I ended up in New York for my internship. And here I am, like smack dab in the middle of a city where everybody has everything at their fingertips. The level of wealth in that city is unfathomable sometimes, right? And people were so miserable, like they're busy all the time. They're like drowning themselves in work and they're miserable. So like, what is the point? It's kind of like the thing, that I was, going through, I guess, at the time. So it was just that juxtaposition of like being halfway across the world in this place where technically these people don't have anything, but they're so happy. And then landing in this place where everybody has everything and they're not happy. And so that kind of stuck in the back of my head. Going back to finish my degree, I was all of a sudden just like, I don't want to do this anymore. Like, I don't know what it is, but I just don't want to do this. But what am I supposed to do? I'm like 3 months from finishing college, and this is all I've ever wanted to do. So like, why don't I want to do it now?
Right. You start to feel like feels like there's something wrong with me that all of a sudden this is happening.
Yeah. Like I thought like somehow like I had done something wrong. Like, and I almost regretted going on that trip. I remember thinking like, if I just hadn't gone, if I just hadn't had that experience, like I'd still be motivated. I'd still be driven. I'd still be on that track, And that's like kind of awful to have to be like, well, wait a second. I had this life-changing experience, but I actually hate it. And I wish it didn't exist. So anyway,
I think that's pretty relatable. We'll get to that, but I think that might be more relatable than we think. This is interesting.
I suppose so, right? It's like, I think it's one of those things like, I suppose I was on autopilot. I was just like so driven. I had like such tunnel vision. I wasn't willing to look at anything else. And all of a sudden I was looking at the world differently. And it was like, well, wait a second. If I see this differently, well, what else am I going to see differently? Like, how else am I going to think differently? Like opened up this can of worms that I, at the time, was not ready for.
Like, how dare my joy screw up all of my plans?
Right, exactly. And like, how dare I think that joy could go beyond having a successful career? You know what I mean? Like, how dare I like put away this quote unquote talent that I have or this mission that I've been on to go pursue something else? And God forbid if I do that, well, what is that other thing even going to be? I didn't have an answer for that. And that's terrifying, right? When you're like, no, this was it. Like, this was going to check all the boxes. Well, why isn't it working all of a sudden, And so you kind of feel like a little bit broken, or like something's just off with you. Anyway, I made it about 3 years. And then I think my breaking point was I kept trying to fix it, like I kept trying to think like, well, maybe if I try harder, or maybe if I'm more dedicated, or maybe if I work at a different company, or maybe if I shift gears and I do like more corporate responsibility, and I try to improve working conditions, maybe that'll make me feel better. Or I don't know, it's New York, so maybe I'll go into the theater region. I'll do costume design. Like I tried like all of these different ways to like salvage it, find that place where, okay, I felt good about what I was doing. And I was still using my degree and my skills, but at the end of the day, I mean, it just was never going to be there. So yeah, I think the last straw for me was right before fashion week, excuse me.
Which is a big deal in New York.
Which is a big deal.
Yeah. A little bit of a big deal.
A little bit of a big deal. Yeah. So, and I was working for like a women's wear collection. And so we had this big presentation. We were a very small team. So it was like all hands on deck all the time, no weekends, like always in the office late. And we were a couple weeks out and I was trying to get everything ready for the show. And it was like at least 2 a.m. And I was looking at the train schedule and I was trying to figure out if I was going to like close up shop real fast, run to the train station, like make it to the 2:30 train so I could go home, or work for another hour, make it on the 3:30 train and then go home, and I was sitting there thinking to myself, like, why am I debating between a 2:30 a.m. train and a 3:30 a.m. train? Like, that is not the question I should be asking myself here.
Wrong question.
Why the hell are you in this office? Anyway, I got through Fashion Week, and a couple months after that, I just walked into the office one day, and the CEO happened to be there, and I just quit. So there we go.
Wow, and that okay?
Yeah,
I mean, that is such a powerful moment, and there were probably many moments before that, 2 a.m., 3 a.m. moments that went ignored, that it's like there were probably many other nudges that you were experiencing that you even said it's like that's the straw, that was the one that finally broke it. Why do you think that was the moment? Do you have any idea like what led to that? It just piled on and it was just time, or were there any other signs for you?
That's a good question. I think it's definitely that it was just the pile on for sure. It was also like, I don't know if you have this, like there are moments of clarity at 2 a.m., right? Like if you can't sleep or like you're up alone, it's quiet, like the city is quiet. Like sometimes that's when you have like your biggest truths with yourself, I guess, or when you're like really honest about things. So I think there was something telling about the fact that it was just like that time of day. And there was also no one else in the office at the time. I was the last one there to be like, we got to get this done. This needs to happen. Because there was always that pressure. Like it was always like this, right? And like everything was a crisis all the time. So you were just always like so inundated and slammed with work and busy. Like there wasn't really time to think about it. Like it was like every day was like a life-threatening situation, if that makes sense, So you're almost kind of in survival mode. So you don't have time to worry about whether or not you like it, right? Or whether or not it's serving you. It's like you have a job to do and there's 27,000 things on that list that have to get done today. So I think a lot of it, I was just like so stuck in that grind all the time.
It's unfortunately quite relatable. That I'm sure other people who are listening have either been there, maybe they are there, maybe they're catching it before they're quite there, which is amazing. If you're hearing this and you're like, oh, there's something I could learn here. So you had previously, this was your dream. You were 10 years old and you're like, this is what I'm going to do. You did it. You're in New York. You're living the Project Runway dream. I'm a person of Bravo TV basically raised me.
Yeah.
through my teens and 20s. You're living that beautiful dream and now you just quit it. What happened next?
Oh, well, a lot of weird things. So I
love the weird things. Tell us about the weird things, Kristin.
Well, it was just like as you were like saying that and you're talking about this living the dream, I think one of the hardest things I had to get over as I was making this transition was like the guilt. Because what you're describing is a lot of people's quote unquote dreams, right? And so I was occupying this space in this quote unquote glamorous industry that everybody was supposed to want to work in and work hard in, and I wasn't enjoying it. And I left it. And it just, I don't know, it kind of felt icky. You know what I mean? Like this thing that people aspired to do, that I aspired to do, and then I was rejecting it. Or like this thing that, my parents supported me, when I was younger. And that was, that was a big deal to me because it was like me being an artist, I think. And so to have that support and for them to say, yeah, move to New York, go after it, like they very could have easily said, that doesn't seem safe or that doesn't seem, whatever. Like it is kind of a little whimsical, you might think, when you grow up in Iowa.
Oh, you're a Midwestern girl. Yeah. From Kansas.
Are you?
Yes.
Where are you from?
Kansas, Wichita, Kansas. So not so different.
Yeah. So, like when you grow up in the Midwest, I mean, like New York is far away. Like you don't have those examples, right? So that's kind of a big leap. So anyway, that was just weird to leave all of that behind. Definitely kind of went through an identity crisis with that. But what my saving grace was in all of this was yoga, because when I was in New York and I was working those crazy hours, the one thing I would try to do for myself was escape to yoga class every once in a while. I did not get there as often as I should have. Like I was lucky if I made the 9 p.m. class, like that was a big day for me to make it to 9 p.m. yoga. But like
because there was no 3 a.m. yoga for you to go to.
I mean, if there had been 3 a.m. yoga, like I would have been there every time.
And you'd obviously gotten over the bare feet situation and you were all in on yoga.
Yeah, I had accepted it at that point. It was a slow transition. Like I was a person that wore socks in yoga for a while. So anyway, but yeah, it was my saving grace. So like it was like my escape. And it was just like such a contrast to being in a design office where everybody wanted everything all the time. There was no appreciation. Like it was really kind of a toxic work environment, right? Which I think we can understand, like just thinking about how the fashion industry works. So I would go to yoga and everyone was so happy and joyful and loving. And that same smile that I saw on those people's faces in India, I would see it on the yoga instructors' faces. And I would be like, wait a second, like these guys are onto something, because they show up to class and they're in a good mood. And I'm here like, just wanting like a tiny smidget of that, for an hour to make my life bearable. And so that was something that kind of always lived in my brain. Like people are happy here, like good things happen here. Like this is a supportive environment, not a toxic one. And one of the things that bothered me about working in the fashion industry was just like, I felt like I was contributing to a lot of negative things. In addition to the fact that like the culture was a little bit toxic, like I'm working with factories halfway across the world and I'm pushing them on price when I shouldn't be pushing them on price because it's already super low. I'm asking them to make impossible deadlines. Their workers are working way more hours than they should be. Who knows what they're pumping into the rivers? Like, I mean, it was just like this, like on and on and on and on. And all of the icky stuff that you don't see that I knew was happening, even if it wasn't happening in the design office, it stemmed from the design office, right? Where were the ones responsible? Because we're at the top. And so that really bothered me being in the yoga space. Like I wasn't having to do any of that. Like it seemed so positive. So anyway, there was this teacher training flyer at the studio that I went to. And when I was in New York, I always wanted to do the teacher training because I didn't realize that it was something I could even do. I was like, wait a second, like they have trainings for this? Like I could actually teach this? Like, no way. And I just thought it was going to be like a Saturday thing for me to like counteract all the icky stuff I felt like I was doing, right? Anyway, fast forward to my now husband wanted to go back to school. He was moving to California. I was like, screw it. I'm going to go too. Never had time to get the teacher training in New York because my work schedule was too unpredictable. Like I couldn't commit to 6 to 9 p.m. on a Thursday. There was just no way. So
no 3 a.m. teacher training either.
Yeah, exactly. Again, where's the 3 a.m. session? I'm ready for that session. So anyway, when I knew that life was going to shift that way, I kind of just, said, screw it. And the first thing I did the very first day that we moved to California was start my teacher training. And I guess I never looked back after that.
What? And here's the thing. Your story has so many relatable moments that I myself have lived. And I know that a lot of people have lived. So thank you for sharing it in that detail, because I think it also helps to see the little moments when you were really courageous, where you did listen to yourself and
not insane.
I think that those are like two sides of the same coin.
Right. I agree. Yeah.
Like anxiety and excitedness and anxiousness are two sides of the same coin. Probably,
yes.
Courageousness and insanity are probably also
very close.
Two sides of the same club. But what you talked about, I think, is a really important thing that nobody's ever coined it quite like this, because you talked about the guilt of quitting, and the phrase that came into my mind was quitter's guilt. Guilt. We have this. And as somebody also Midwest, I'm like, I'm doing a cool job. I should appreciate that I'm doing this really cool job. I'm currently in this growth cycle and everything is going really well. And then we feel a nudge that makes no sense to us in many ways. Like we recognize the burnout, but we also have this nudge to do something so different and we'll talk ourselves out of it time and time again. We'll keep talking ourselves out of it. So is there anything that you have experienced along this path that you would like to share with people? Like any nuggets of wisdom that you would say to somebody else who might be in that, hopping on, which train do I get on at 2 or 3 a.m.? If they're in that moment for themselves, what would you share with them?
I think what it is for me, what I had to learn the hard way is that you can't wish that feeling away. Like, it's not going to go anywhere. I mean, you can switch jobs and you'll be distracted by the fact that your new job is different, and it might be better. It might be an improvement, right? But that feeling is going to come back. You could distract yourself with a new hobby, with working out, with whatever the case might be. You could try like 27 different versions of what your job is. But at the end of the day, if it's not working for you, like, that nagging feeling is going to come back at 3 a.m. or 2 a.m. every single time. And it sucks to like stare at the ceiling or stare at your computer and just be like, oh my God, I can't do this anymore. But also like not know exactly what the next step is. But I think that's also the beauty of it, because I think the one thing I understood was that if I stayed and tried to figure it out behind the scenes, I was never going to. Right? Because I was never going to have enough time. I was never going to have enough headspace to actually work through it. Because I kept thinking like, well, maybe I can just do something different on Saturdays, or maybe I can, but it was like, no, like for me, and that's not for everyone, but for me, it was like, I had to do a clean break. Like I had to leave the environment that was creating the problem, because there was just no headspace to think about what else could fill that area of my life, and I think I also had to leave New York because I knew that even if I had quit my job, I would get sucked back in. It would be too easy. The industry is right there, like I'd maybe be on my own for 3 to 6 months and I'd be like, well, this is not paying the rent. So I'm going to go back and get a real job. You know what I mean? So it's just like, I think, yeah, the feeling is it's going to be there. Like no matter what you try to do to pretend that it's not, or convince yourself otherwise, if that's really like what your gut is telling you, listen to it, and even if it's ugly in the moment and it kind of sucks, like at this point, I cannot imagine who I would be right now if I had stayed. I don't want to know, and so I think that's important too. Like think about yourself 10 years from now. Are you going to like the version of you that you're going to become if you stay? For me, the answer was absolutely not. So, has this road been perfect? Of course not. It's been messy and like filled with failure and all kinds of whatever, but like, I'm so glad I did it.
Yeah. And what you said about the beauty of not knowing, it's such a hard thing to accept because there's so much trust that is in that. However, one step will make such a huge difference. Sometimes it means completely untethering. It could mean completely quitting and moving and getting yourself out of it. And there's a lot to that. I myself have had that experience too, where you just completely leave something and start fresh because you gain this whole new experience. And all of a sudden you're in a completely different environment. But we can also do this in tiny micro ways. And I think it's always checking in with yourself and really what is it that's needed? Because sometimes it is that big ass move like you made. So
yeah, for me, that's what worked. I know for a lot of people it doesn't. And you have to take into account the other things going on in your life. Like we all have bills and responsibilities, and it is super scary to be like, well, I'm just going to quit my job and I have zero idea like where the income is going to come from. Like we have to think about like we live in a world where money exists, and so that's a big part of it too. But yeah, I think the biggest part is just like giving yourself the space, whatever it is, wherever you can find it, to just like sit and think and explore and remember to dream again and just see where that takes you, and also like maybe not to be ashamed of what comes up, like who cares? You want to weave baskets? Awesome. Weave baskets. Like there shouldn't be judgment around that, but there often is, you know what I mean? Because we feel like we need to be this like perfect professional person that has everything figured out, or we have to have this like sought after job or this job title, but no, you want to like make pickles, like potter, it like, doesn't matter, just like go after it and do it. If it makes you happy, like it's so worth it. And I think as long as you follow that like through thread of joy, we're like, yeah, like this feels right. This feels good. You'll figure the rest out slowly but surely.
It's so true. I saw a video last night that I just shared on Instagram today of a lady who does videos with possums, like how to take care of your opossums.
How funny.
If this lady can follow her joy and make a living from teaching people how to take care of their opossums, then you can do anything. You can live your most untethered life.
Yes, there's hope for all of us. Like, have no fear. And I think that's part of it too. It's like, I think a lot of us are like kind of afraid to like let our internal selves out. And part of like doing what I did required that. And I think that was terrifying because I was really buttoned up, like I showed up in the world in a certain way and I was a go-getter and I took no prisoners. And like, that's just how it was going to be, like I didn't have emotion, like we didn't talk about those things, like, and I really had to like peel back the layers on that if I was going to be an effective teacher, and I also just had to be willing to like show up in the world in a way where I'm a little bit vulnerable sometimes, I don't always have it figured out. And I think that was scary for me to like show up and just be like, yeah, I don't know everything. And that's okay. So it's like kind of accepting your own little freak flag a little bit, and like letting it fly. But that's a big deal, for us to do that because there's a reason we keep all that stuff locked in, right? I mean, it's a protectionary measure. There's a reason that we have those extra layers, in front of us. So that's a big part of it too. Like, I think being okay with just being who you are, even if it's not a box that somebody else can check or it's not the way you thought your life was going to go.
If you can't do it for yourself right now, do it for other people, because by you waving your weird, sparkly unicorn magic, I would call it, flag, you're showing your true self. You're showing that beauty that's inside of yourself. You're encouraging other people to do it too. And so often we're looking around and saying nobody else is doing it. It's like, well, right. They will do it if you do.
Exactly. And that's, I think, what I had to learn through teaching. It's like, unfortunately, like those first few years were a little rough because no, I can't show up in a yoga studio the way I showed up in a design office. Like it does not work that way, And if I want somebody to learn and grow, then I have to be willing to learn and grow, And if I want them to feel safe, then I have to make sure that I create an environment that makes them feel safe. And I can't have any barriers when I do that or it doesn't work. But that took a lot of like, on the job learning to figure that out.
I'm laughing at the visual of people in business suits attempting to do yoga. And then it brought into mind, I'd never been to physical therapy in my life, but I was a hairstylist for many years and I go to work this office job and I was in actual physical pain sitting in a chair all day because I'd previously done a job that had a lot of movement. So sitting in a chair was so painful. I go into physical therapy and I am in a pencil skirt, black pencil skirt, my shirt tucked into my pencil skirt and a black jacket on because I decided to be this very corporate persona. If I'm going to be in corporate, I'm going to like do the corporate thing. And the lady looks at me and she's like, we're going to have you get on a treadmill today. You're going to do that in your black flats and your pencil skirt. I was like, nobody told me the rules of physical therapy. I had no idea what she was going to have me do.
Oh, totally.
She's like, you're going to have to not wear that. So anyway, it brought to mind that visual of people trying to do office clothes yoga. It's not a good idea.
Totally. Yeah. But like, especially too, if you think about like, you go back, I'm sure you experienced this too, like whatever the expectation was, how you showed up to work in that office, like there was a certain way you had to present yourself. Right. And so it took me a while to shed that, I think, in a different arena because I had just been so used to like, this is how you show up. This is how you're professional. This is how you get the job done. You know what I mean? And, teaching yoga, it's so much more human, right? We have to relate to each other. So a lot of those barriers that we put into place in a corporate setting on purpose, we have to let go of, but it takes a while because those are just so ingrained in us at a certain point. So how did you deal with that? Because you went hairstylist and then you were in the corporate space for a while, right? And now you're doing, all of this good stuff. So like, did you ever feel like you had to like kind of work through some of that when you were starting on this road?
Yeah, great question. Thanks for turning that back around on me.
Of course.
Yeah. So going into corporate, I felt like I needed to be a certain kind of way. I had bright blue hair, though. I walked in all black with my bright ass blue hair. I'm in a beige office building. There is nobody else in this place who had any kind of color going on in their hair. But by the time I left 5 years later, there sure the heck was, which I'm sure is not just me, but at the same time was because people reached out to me and said, you gave me the courage to show my tattoo at work. Or you gave me the courage to leave my nose piercing in, or you did give me the courage to put a couple of little pink pieces in my hair. So that was just such a beautiful reminder to me. But in terms of the clothes, I eventually started being more myself because I had that question of like, do I actually need to wear this? And do I like this? But sometimes I did. Sometimes I was like, oh, it kind of feels cool to be in that like power outfit. And I still sometimes enjoy it. So now I just wear whatever feels good. Today I'm wearing a sweatshirt to talk to you, but I might wear something fancy for, I change clothes 6 times a day. So I'm just following my heart at this point, which is like the best way, right? To answer your question. At this point, it's like, I think sometimes we try on enough suits to realize that all of those suits feel good. They all kind of feel good in certain scenarios. And then in other scenarios, they don't feel good. So, I just get to put on various different suits whenever I feel like it, because at the core, I'm a sparkly ball of light who is here having this cool human experience. And so, it's just fun. It gets to be fun.
Yeah. And I think not taking ourselves too seriously, that's a big part of it, right? Which is certainly was something I had to work through too, because I was serious, like I was there with purpose. Like, so it's just, to be able to like sit back and laugh, and just be okay with it, and like, just be like, today's not a good hair day, but yet here I am teaching and it doesn't matter, and like, I have to put myself in these kind of crazy poses in front of people. Like if I had any shame at this point, it wouldn't work, but it's just like, whatever, like, if this is for them, it gets the job done. Like, it's not about me, So like, I just have to do whatever I have to do to serve them. And if I, in any way, shape or form, am concerned about me, then it doesn't work, So
yeah, a lot of people have taken a good hard look at your butt. That's for sure.
I'm sure they have. And these are things that I used to care about. And now I'm just like, whatever, you want, like, go for it. Like, if this helps you learn, fine.
Yoga. I've recently picked up my yoga practice again, and it is so funny. Sometimes I have that thought, like if somebody only had ever experienced corporate life or like the structure that we have created, and they walked into a yoga class, they would be like, what is happening in here? But it's wonderful. So let's talk about your pivot to entrepreneurship. And even if you consider it a pivot, what got you to the point of starting your business? Where were you at that point? Because when you trained, were you thinking, I'm going to start a business? Where were you at with that?
No, I think that was the interesting part for me, is I didn't really know what going down this road was going to mean. I just figured I would figure it out eventually. Like if yoga was the end goal, great. If it was something else, great. But going through this was going to help me figure out what the next step was. And I just fell in love with teaching. And I loved learning, and it was just like opened up this whole world for me that didn't exist before. So I just stuck with it. And of course, like in the beginning, man, it was a challenge to get one class at a studio, like in Southern California, teachers are a dime a dozen, and most of them had a lot more experience than me. And, at that time too, like they wanted to know, like, are people going to follow you if you change studios? Like they want to know what your clientele is. And like, I didn't have any of that. I was like, I have a 200-hour teacher training certificate. I just finished. You want to hire me? Like
hire me. Anything helps.
Yeah. So it was a battle just to get one class, and then it was a battle to get another class, and it was a battle to get another class, and to like slowly start building my teaching portfolio. So, I mean, that was a couple years deep right there, just like getting to a place where I even had classes to teach and serving those studios and, whatever the class was, and trying to, figure out how to manage all the balls in the air. Cause I thought teaching yoga would be easy. And at least in the beginning, it certainly was not, because there's a lot going on in a short frame of time. So I did that. And then because of my experience in, fashion and working for companies, I really wanted to change the status quo. That was a lot of kind of what was driving me. So I started going into companies a little bit more, which was kind of a futile effort. I think I got the door slammed in my face more than I actually got in. But nonetheless, like I did a decent amount of corporate teaching. And so that was interesting, like bringing, that practice into a place that was so very, rigid and different, but also was rewarding for me because at least it was like, well, at least there's an hour in their day where they get to do something that's, not so serious, right? And they get to decompress a little bit and manage stress. So anyway, I did that for quite a few years, like, one class at a time, one client at a time, like, one event at a time. I mean, if there was a place that offered a class, I probably taught in it, right? Because I was just like, I want to have my hands in all the pots, and I want to be able to have as much experience as a teacher as possible. And for me, that meant a lot of breadth in terms of what I was doing. And while I was doing this, I couldn't quite pay all my bills teaching yoga. So I was also doing graphic design. So I was still kind of using my degree a little bit, which fed my ego, I suppose, right? Because I hadn't like completely gone off the bandwagon yet. I was still like kind of in it, you know? So anyway, I did that for a while and I worked myself up to a point where I finally had made more money doing that than I ever made in New York. And I was like, awesome, great. And then it was just kind of like crickets where it was like, well, but when now what? Like this is great. Like this is such an improvement compared to where I was before. But now where is this leading me? I kind of reached that first plateau. I've been climbing. And I was finally like where I could kind of see the layout. And it was like, okay, well, now I need to think bigger, or I need to think about what that next step is going to be so that this can sustain me for, whatever length I want my career to be, And so it was just kind of taking all the things that I observed in teaching and a lot of things that people struggled with just trying to get themselves to class, or when they're in class, or especially like in the corporate area, like people trying to juggle like work and life. And that's hard, And so just distilling all of that into a program that allowed me to kind of put all my expertise to work. And also hopefully, give me an opportunity to explore, new things like writing and this, that, and the other, to like really take it to the next level, I guess. So for me, it was about growth, like I got myself to a point that was awesome and I could have just stayed there, but I'm not a coaster, like there's always got to be something else. And so anyway, that's I guess how I made this transition. And yeah, now I'm working on FLOFICIENT and managing an online program, and it's a lot of work, but man, has it been a good and worthwhile journey. So
yeah, tell us about FLOFICIENT. What have you created and what are you excited about with it?
So it's interesting. The creative process is so organic. So when I started down this road, I was thinking more about the classes and helping people create like a nice little like workout schedule that like help ebb and flow, right? Because yoga is fantastic, but so is cardio, so is weightlifting, so is spinning. There's no one right way. And what I was finding, I had the best success with clients that were doing a lot of things, right? And so it was kind of combining that and be like, oh yeah, these things work really well together. Like these things, help you build a ton of strength and save you time. And so it was creating that perfect little like jigsaw puzzle of like, here's ways to like get it all in. Because I was also a person like to run and do other kinds of things. And I always struggled with like, okay, well, I want to run today, but I also want to do yoga. That's a 2.5 hour commitment. I don't have 2.5 hours. So like, how do I get it all in? You know what I mean? Sometimes we wonder like, well, what is the right way to work out? Or like, what's the best workout that I can do? And so anyway, I was trying to solve all those problems with FLOFICIENT. So that's where I started. What it's kind of grown into in addition to that, because all of that stuff is there, is just helping people create their best routine possible. Not one that's dictated by me or by somebody else, but one that they create for themselves that comes from joy, really, because working out should be fun and working out should be fulfilling and rewarding. That goes, so much beyond like a perfect six pack or like trying to sweat. I think that's what gets us stuck a lot, right? And I think, especially in this podcast, you talk about like getting stuck. And I think one of the places in our lives that we get stuck the most is with exercise.
So true. So true. A lot of what you're describing. So I'm somebody who's also run marathons, and I also started doing yoga to take care of all of the problems from running marathons. So I follow your journey too. And I think a lot of people are in that. It's like, well, how do I do this and do that? And so what you're creating is a solution to something that you really wanted and needed, something that you said, and I'm probably going to title this episode, anybody who's listening knows that by now, is that there's no one right way. There's no one right way. And that's the journey that you have been on. It feels like your life. And now you're turning around and you're creating that. It's like how to create from this place of joy, because that's your way. Like that you get to create your way. I guess the one right way would be your way.
That's the thing. The only right way is your way. And it's important to remember that your only right way might change over time, because like I saw over and over again, people would get stuck. Like, I'm just going to use spinning as an example. Like, if you love to spin, by all means, keep spinning. Like, there's nothing wrong with it. But I just
Which is like intense biking for anybody.
Intense biking.
Before I went to a spinning class, I didn't know what it was.
But it still is popular, but it went through like a wave a few years ago where it was like just like ballooning, right? And like everybody was spinning all the time, and it's like, man, you can burn 800 calories in a class and whatever. So that's fantastic if you love spinning. But if you don't like it and you feel like you have to go because that's what everyone else is doing, or that's the most effective way to burn calories, like, it's only going to last for so long. Like, or, if your friend runs, so you feel like you should be running too, but you actually hate running, well, then why, try to put yourself through that? But we do that with exercise. We do that with fitness, right? Because, man, you scroll through Instagram and this person has a six pack and this person says to do this, and this celebrity, well, they're doing this, so that must be effective, Or we think about like, well, what we could do at like 16. Well, I could bench press whatever when I was 16. I should be able to do it at 35. Well, yes, maybe no, But there's all these inputs, right? And so I think that happens with fitness so much, is we just feel like we have to adhere ourselves to a certain standard. We have to work out in a certain way. We've never had to ask the question, well, what would I do if it was completely up to me? Because we rely on classes and trainers. Same question I had to ask myself a long time ago, like, well, what would I do, if the sky was the limit? So I think that's really cool, because when we can get to a place with exercise where we're not worried about the expectation, we're not worried about how many calories we burn, we're doing it because it makes us happy, because it serves a broader purpose, because it feels good, it's a whole different experience with exercise, right? And it's so much easier for it to be part of our lives, because it's not this thing that we dread. It's not this thing that's in conflict with the other parts of our life. It's just this thing that we do. And I think that's pretty cool when people can get there and they have that experience. And it's like, oh, this doesn't have to be so hard, right? This doesn't have to be a grind. Like, it can be this thing that like supports me and everything else that I do. And yeah, that's pretty cool.
That's a big shift in perspective that you're sharing here in terms of exercise. Is, we're not just running because that's the thing that's going to get me healthy, but asking your question, like, what would feel really fun to me right now? What would bring me joy right now? What would bring my body joy right now? Oh, it's actually to do a little bit of running and then some walking and then some yoga. What is it that would feel good? So I love that you're creating something that is enabling people to do that, and from this very conscious space that you are in. And I'm reflecting this back to listeners too, because what you're saying, this is about fitness, and it is really, really applicable to fitness. And you're also looking at it from this broader perspective of that question, which was, what would I do if it was completely up to me?
Exactly.
That goes into your workout, and that goes into everything. What would I do right now if it was completely up to me? Untethered.
Yeah.
That's exactly. So untethered.
Exactly. Yeah. And on top of that, if I do that thing, that's completely up to me, is it going to help me get to wherever it is I want to go? That's the other piece of the puzzle. It's like, okay, if I could pick any candy in the candy store, what would it be? But that's awesome. I picked a candy. Right, exactly. Butterscotch. Okay. But if your goal is to win the Nobel Prize, which I know is not related to butterscotch, but like, let's pretend, is that butterscotch candy going to get you to the Nobel Prize or wherever it is you're going? Maybe it is. I don't know.
Maybe it's probably more of that giant jawbreaker if you want to get to the Nobel Prize, exactly. Let's be honest.
Or win the Guinness Book. Here, that's a better example. If you want to win the Guinness Book of World Records record for sucking on a jawbreaker, you're going to have to pick the jawbreaker, right? But, if your goal is something else, then, pick a different candy. So I think that's part of it. What do you want to do? How is that going to get you to where you want to go? And then how does that fit into like the broader aspects of your life? Because we have, physical health is just the base of mental health, emotional health, spiritual health, all of that stuff, right? So like, how does that all stack together in a place where you can sit back and go, yeah, like this is right. This is good,
Yeah. Such powerful questions. Thank you for sharing those. I have one final question for you before we leave this conversation today. Kristin, where do you see the magic in the world?
Where do I see the magic in the world? That is an excellent question. I think I see it when I work with people. And there's this moment when I'm teaching where, I'm kind of leading them to a certain place. They're not quite sure what it is yet, but, they're going with the flow. And all of a sudden, they're doing something they didn't expect. All of a sudden they're holding a pose, or they're balancing, or they're reaching their foot for the first time, or whatever it might be. And you just see like this kind of little like dazed and confused look on their face where they're like, oh my God, like I just did, I just did this thing, and then that's usually followed by not like a full outright smile, but like just this kind of like subtle shift, and like you can tell they're happy about it, right? It's that discovery, and then it's like the little bit of joy that follows. And that's always pretty cool to me because, we're all capable of so many amazing things, right? But oftentimes we just don't have the opportunity or the space to even realize it. So when they realize that in this tiny little moment in the yoga class, like I know they're going to leave class feeling lighter. And I know that if that happens enough times, they're going to start to think, well, what else can I do? And so that's pretty cool. That's like, it's like the gateway drug, if you will. Like those little
like a
aha
micro
moments.
moment that leads
exactly.
to even bigger moments.
Yeah. And the best part is like, it happens with someone at any age. And I think it's even cooler when it's like someone who's like in their 70s or 80s and they're like, I just did what? Like they're just like shocked that they did this thing, that they were convinced that they were not flexible, that they couldn't do it, that it was like out of the realm of possibility. They just did it and they nailed it. That's pretty cool.
That's so beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. Kristin, where can people connect with you? Where can they find FLOFICIENT if they're interested in checking it out?
Yeah, sure. So they can connect with me. My website is KristinLeeGeiger.com, my whole name. FLOFICIENT is my fitness app and program. So that's app.floficient.com. And then I'm on LinkedIn and I'm on Instagram under those same names. So I should be pretty easy to find.
All those links are in the show notes too, if you want to go and check her out, which I know you're going to want to. So thank you so much for coming on the podcast and sharing your story today.
Yeah, thank you for having me, Jen. It's been so much fun to talk to you. And yeah, you've been doing so much cool stuff. So you're a joy to talk to with everything you've been doing and, inspiring for all of us too. So keep it up.
Thank you. Huge thank you to Kristin for coming on the podcast and sharing her story. I cannot wait for Thursday to dive into some of these topics in the Thursday Thread episode. I'm going to pull out a couple of strings from this episode and go in a little bit deeper. So stay tuned for Thursday's episode where that is going to happen. If there's something that you loved about this episode, I encourage you to share it with a friend. Go check out all of Kristin's links that are in the show notes. Go follow her if you're interested in checking out her fitness program. Oh, if you enjoyed this episode, I encourage you to share it with a friend. If you really liked it, if there was something really powerful for you, share it with all your friends. You can take a little screenshot of it, put it on social media, tag me, tag Kristin. Her link, again, is in the show notes. And so is mine. I'm Untethered Jen on Instagram. If you tag us, we will reshare your posts. It would really mean the world to me if you did. Thank you again so much for listening. You just keep shining your magical unicorn light out there for all to see. I'll see you next time. Bye.